It is the morning after the night before. All the pomp and ceremony is long gone, and I'm sure a lot of Lions fans today in Dublin have a sore head. But for Andy Farrell and the squad as they depart to Australia, there will be plenty to think about after Argentina left the Aviva Stadium with a famous 28 points to 24 win. I'm Will Slattery. Welcome to the Indo Sport Podcast. And I'm joined this morning for our debrief by Rory O'Connor and Cian Tracy, who were in the Aviva Stadium last night. But first, a reminder that our rugby coverage on Indo Sport is brought to you by Energia. Energia sponsors rugby in Ireland at all levels, at grassroots with the Energia AIL, and as the official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht, and the Irish men's and women's teams. The Energia Rugby for All initiative supports inclusion, welcoming everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. To learn more about Energia's rugby partnerships and find out about their exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. Guys, thanks for joining me today. Least of all, that we tried and failed to get off the ground in the Aviva Stadium last night. Some technical difficulties, meaning that we had to reconvene bright and early, Rudd and Cian, for another chat. But I feel like a bit of extra time to marinate on our ideas, potentially could lead to a more fruitful and robust discussion. So that will be the party line. And please, no one ever asked me about what went wrong last night. It's too traumatic and painful to relive. Rod, we were standing on the street waiting for my pregnant wife to pick us up at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we were in despair.
Yeah, I don't know how we're still talking to each other. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know who had a worse night, us or the Lions. But we're here. We are.
Yeah,
Super Rugby final on. We're moving on. We could do a watch along to that, but no, let's focus on what happened last night and maybe what didn't happen as well.
Yeah, Rod. So what's your reflection now? 12 hours later, it was an amazing occasion that is obvious to anyone who maybe tuned in on TV or was lucky enough to go or was even walking around Dublin city centre yesterday evening or before the game. It was just a sea of red, so much colour, so many people wearing the merchandise. I'd say the pop-up superstore beside Stephen's Green were probably making money hand over fist. The game was an absolute cracker, just from that point of view, end to end. Argentina really brought it from the off. But from a Lions perspective, from Andy Farrell's perspective, how will he be feeling now as he boards that long haul flight?
Well, I've just been writing up his quotes from last night, and he definitely never didn't sugarcoat it at the time, but even reading it in the cold light of day, he's pretty scathing about his team. And when we watched the kind of tour documentary that they put out last Wednesday or Thursday, we saw the kind of big cuddly Faz, the environment builder. He was asking players, talk about a player who surprised you or you've grown to admire since you've met them on the Lions, and you saw him crying and Finlay Bealham, and I read Cian's piece yesterday about with Finlay Bealham about that experience and how special the Lions is, and that's all we've been hearing since he named the squad. And I think from the moment they set foot in the dressing room, maybe even at halftime, but definitely at full time, the players who didn't know him already, and there's a fair few, probably saw a different side of Andy Farrell. I did a piece with Dave Kilcoyne last week, and he talked about how he loves Farrell, but he said he's ruthless. And when you trust him and you don't mind him being ruthless because you know how much he puts into it and how much he gives to it as well, and how good he is. And I think that there might be a few of those kind of English, Welsh, and Scottish players who haven't encountered him before, who are maybe taken aback by how cutting he was, because he had loads of reasons to reach for excuses, and he didn't take any of them. He was absolutely unforgiving in the way he talked about the team's performance last night. And when you look at the statistics from the game, which again we've the luxury of doing, having slept on it a little bit, like they had 16 visits to the Argentina 22 last night, and got so little out of it. 60% possession, 72% territory. You give an Andy Farrell team those kind of opportunities, usually they win the game. And to come away with the result that they got, albeit against an Argentina team who were so good at taking their chances and rose to the occasion better than the Lions did, it's going to irk him. And he's got a long flight today. They leave at 3 o'clock this afternoon via Doha. There's a long time to stew on it, and it just kind of sends them off on the wrong note.
I feel like he's going to watch all 4 John Wicks just to get it out of his system, that performance. And even then, he might still have some bloodlust in his mind. Cian, I want to circle back to that press conference in a little bit, because I agree with Rudd. I found it really interesting just to see the dynamics and some of his answers. But just from your perspective, the ebb and flow of the game, what you saw from the Lions, what you didn't see. Like first 20 minutes, I thought they looked really slick. Like you were in Quinta del Laga at the training camp. It looked like they'd really put together some good things on the training pitch. But as the game wore on, we saw maybe a bit less of that. And as Rudge said, those 22 visits, that really tells the story. The amount of mistakes they made, it kind of in kind of gilt-edged positions. How do you assess that performance and how it unfolded?
I think I would take a leaf out of Andy Farrell's book from the press conference and start by giving absolutely all the credit to Argentina. Like, what a brilliant night for Argentinian rugby. 20 years ago, obviously, they drew with the Lions in Cardiff, weren't quite able to get the job done when Felipe Contepomi was still playing. And I thought it was a coaching masterclass from Felipe Contepomi, to be honest. I thought the quality of Argentina's starter plays was exceptional. And, you know, anyone who's followed Leinster when Felipe Contepomi was there will have recognised, I think, a few of those. Their first try was outstanding off a second phase move from the line out through Ignacio Mendy. And they had really done their homework. I mean, before that try was even scored, they had made a break by targeting the outside channel of Sione to Pilato. Tommy Freeman got a bit caught out there. Mendy was left one on one with Duhan van der Merwe in the backfield. He left the big Scottish winger on his arse. So I thought from an Argentinian point of view, it was a sensational victory, one of their biggest victories in their history. It's a shame, obviously, there was no caps handed out for it, but I think this can act as a real springboard now for them. They're going to be taking on England on their summer tour, obviously on home soil, leading into the Rugby Championship before they come back up to this part of the world in November. So I think before we kind of obviously look at it through the Lions prism, certainly I would like to give massive credit to Argentina and Felipe Contepomi. They've always been a brilliant team to watch, and actually ironically they really struggled at the scrum last night, which was a huge positive for the Lions. I thought Ellis Genge was probably the Lions best player, but I thought Finlay Bealon was outstanding as well. It was a really good night for John Fogarty, the scrum coach, but that would have been traditionally sort of Argentina's, you know, bread and butter, really strong pack, really strong front row, whereas now they still have a good pack, don't get me wrong. They had a tough night at the scrum. They have a brilliant back row. I thought Joaquim Oviedo, their number 8, who was brilliant against Ireland in November, was class again last night. I'd be very surprised if one of the top clubs won't be having a look at him. I think he's still only 23. What a super talent. But it's the quality of their backs. I thought their half backs, in particular, Garcia and Thomas Albornoz, two guys playing their rugby in Italy, were sensational. And you look at the quality of players that weren't there last night. I saw Juan Cruz Malia playing for Toulouse, setting up a try for Roman Entamac in their top 14 semi-final win. So they still have a good bit of quality to come back into the team as well. So I thought it was a brilliant night for Argentina.
Yeah, and it caps off a great 12 months for Felipe Contepomi in the job. They've beaten France, New Zealand, South Africa, Australia, and now the Lions. And as you say, England to come. Obviously, England missing some Lions players, but if they can get that bit of consistency, because I feel like they've been great at taking scalps. Even Michael Cheika, the back end of his tenure, like they went to New Zealand, they won there as well, and got to a World Cup semi-final. But that bit of consistency is what maybe sometimes causes, or the lack of it causes us to overlook them. Or certainly me, to be fair, I probably wouldn't have mapped them to coming and playing quite as well. Rud, so what are some of the, I suppose, talking points then coming out of this? Like you have a collection of players who were kept on ice for the first game, the Leinster players, the Bat players, Ollie Chesham of Leicester. And Andy Farrell mentioned in the build-up to the Argentina game that those guys were behind the 8 ball because obviously they didn't get the first crack at it. Anyone who put their hand up well last night is firmly in the test frame from the off. But now after that performance, I feel like those guys going to the Western Force game on Saturday, which won't be as difficult. I know there's travel involved, but won't be as difficult as an Argentina team whose tails were up. Those guys now kind of have the initiative back as well. What's your read on that dynamic? Maybe flipping slightly from what Andy Farrell said initially.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm sure that they weren't looking for, you know, I'd like they need to go out and earn the jersey themselves, but they would have shifted fairly comfortably up in the stands last night. Those players who, you know, Andy Farrell had said they were behind the 8 ball, and I was at a media event in UCD yesterday. They did a kind of training session with a load of kids, and a couple of the players were brought over to talk to us, and they spoke about playing catch up a little bit and how that trip to Portugal had kind of broken down some of the barriers that are there between the four nations, and the they're obviously, I'm not sure they're using a new calling. I think the system is the same, but there might be new names on the call. So there's stuff to learn in terms of terminology and a bit of catching up to do in all of that for the players who came in late. But I do think for the Irish players in particular, you have a degree of comfort in the fact that Andy Farrell knows you, he trusts you, he's picked you for big games for Ireland before, you've been through it before with them, and you know what he wants and expects from you. And like they walk into what, I don't know when they'll meet for the first time. Obviously, they had a chat in the dressing room last night, and they'll all kind of head over. Most of them are on the same flights, but they'll come together in Australia. But they know what to expect from Andy Farrell's review. They'll know how to anticipate his tone. They're a step ahead in a couple of different ways. And now they know that they're opposite the people they're vying. Not everyone let themselves down last night. Not everyone played themselves out of contention. But certain players will know that if they perform against Western Force next week, given it's a short, sharp tour and there's not that much time between now and the first test, they're in a really good position because they're also in the Saturday team. And it's that Saturday team is going to be the one really that goes into that will be the favourites to play in the tests because they're playing the Waratahs the following Saturday in Sydney. You'd anticipate that's going to be very close to the team Andy Farrell wants to put out against Australia a fortnight after that. There will be mixing and matching. There's loads of time for injury. There's loads of time for players to find a bit of form and go on a bit of a run. But there's also, last night was a really good opportunity because they were playing the 5th ranked team in the world. And if you put down a marker there, that's going to carry way more weight and more currency in Andy Farrell's mind than a game against a combined New Zealand-Australia team or say an understrength Brumbies who don't have their Wallabies. Once you get over there and the tests get closer, the value of those warm-up games is diminished slightly. I say Finn Russell will be looking forward to playing for Leinster, and getting alongside all these players he's been playing against and see what that's like. But across there were players who did well last night, but not enough of them, I think, that they'll be happy going on the plane today.
Yeah, like of the guys who did well, Keane mentioned him already. I thought Ellis Genge was probably the Lions man of the match. I'm not sure who actually got it in the end. Finn Smith, I thought picked up where he left off from that Maybank holiday weekend. I thought he looked really sharp. The Finn versus Finn battle, I think, will be one of the intriguing subplots to look forward to, Keane. But I think two guys who, in my mind, reputations were massively enhanced last night by not playing were two Irish guys in Jack Conan and Gary Ringrose. Like the back row balance when the squad was named, I thought it looked a little off. You only have one real out-and-out number 8 who plays there week in, week out in Jack Conan. Obviously, Ben Earl plays there for Saracens, but Tom Willis plays there a lot as well, and he's kind of a smaller guy. And then Tom Curry obviously played 6 last night and has done a lot for England, but I think his best position is probably 7, played a lot of his career at 7. So last night there were 3 7s on the pitch, and I think it showed. I think, the Argentine back row looked a lot better balanced, and I think they got the benefit of that. And then if you look in the centres, Bundy Aki and Sione Tui-Pilato, we were all very excited to see how they would dovetail well. The Southern Hemisphere partnership, as Joe Schmidt coined them in the build-up, again, didn't really click. I feel a bit for Tui-Pilato. He's played in Dublin twice in the last 2 weeks in 2 big games and has had to play 13 to accommodate other players, and just hasn't really gone well for him. So I feel like Gary Ringrose might be looking at that and thinking they need a good 13. Hugh Jones is carrying an injury, and likewise Jack Conan will be looking at that thinking that back row, I feel like I'm one good performance away this Saturday against the Western Force to really, as Rudd said, knocking my way into that Saturday team.
Yeah, I think on the man of the match, I think I'm open to correction. It was Thomas Albornoz, the Argentine out half, who was, like I mentioned earlier, absolutely sensational. Thought he was brilliant, and his try was brilliant on the stroke of half time to give them a 21-10 halftime lead. But I agree with you, Will. I think Andy Farrell used the word, I know he used the word clunky to describe his performance. It was a bit like Andy Farrell bingo, because we've heard him use that word to describe Ireland performances many times over the last couple of years, and one in particular stands out to me. Was it 3 or 4 years ago in Rome when Bundy Aki and Stuart McCloskey played in the same Ireland midfield, and it just didn't really work because they were 2 12s, and I thought there was shades to that lad with Bundy Aki and Sione Tui-Pilato, 2 outstanding players, but 2 outstanding 12s really. I don't think Bundy would work that well in the 13 channel as well. So I think when Farrell used the word clunky, it could be used to describe the 2 centres. I think they would have needed to shoot the lights out, I think, to really propel them in terms of being a possible centre partnership for the Test series. Because I think you're right, Will. I think both Gary Ringrose and Hugh Jones, being more natural 13s, offer you a better balance, particularly when you think they're going to come up against a guy like Len Ikitau, who's been class for the Wallabies for the last while. It was interesting. Hugh Jones obviously has had an Achilles injury, but he was doing the warm up last night, but he actually seemed to pull out before the end of it. I don't know if that was part of the plan. Maybe they're just monitoring it, but he definitely didn't finish the sort of in that Finn Russell, Josh van der Fleer, Jack Conan we're doing. On the back row, I agree with you as well. Look, I would have thought from a long way out, as soon as Andy Farrell picked the squad and Caelan Doris was ruled out through injury, and I suppose with how well Jack Conan has been playing, I think he's nailed on to be the starting Test 8, to be honest, because like you said, Will, he is the only natural out and out 8, and he's been playing brilliant for Leinster. He was great in the URC final last week. Jack Morgan, he had a couple of good turnovers, a couple of nice moments, but I didn't think it was the type of performance that was a real statement that he probably needs realistically if he wants to get into the Test reckoning. He was a guy who I was really keen to see how he'd go within a strong pack, a strong back row, and it was that. But I think at times he didn't quite impose himself on the game. I think the way he would have looked to have done. So I think in that regard, it was definitely a good night for Josh van der Fleer. When you were naming the two players, I actually thought, Will, you were the two Ireland players who would have been a good night for in terms of van der Fleer and Ringrose. I thought you were going to mention James Lowe actually, because I think it was a very good night for James Lowe.
Sorry, probably the best night of all the players.
Yeah, and again, I think Duan van der Merwe would have to do something special to dislodge James Lowe, purely because as well that Andy Farrell knows what Lowe is all about. And look, Van der Merwe had a couple of nice moments, but that break that he made in the first half and didn't throw the inside pass to Alex Mitchell, who would have had a run in. It was a brilliant support line that all great scrum halves run. But James Lowe throws that pass. How many times have we seen it do it for Gibson Park? And Duan van der Merwe, I don't know, there's an element of him being a one-trick pony. I think he's very one-dimensional in terms he just wants to run over you. I know he threw a couple of offloads, but at that particular moment, he didn't really get his head up and scan the picture that was unfolding in front of him. And I think when you look at what Andy Farrell wants from his wingers, untidy, wasn't that the word that he used last year? He wants his wingers coming in off the wing, but he wants his wingers linking play as well. And I thought it was telling that Mac Hansen came on and got a run on that left wing as well. I do think the spot's going to be James Lowe's to lose, but it wasn't a great night at the office, I didn't think, for Duhan van der Merwe. Some of his aerial work for a guy so big, he's really not great in the air, is he? Some of his defence is pretty lapse as well. He got left for dead for the opening try. So I thought it was a tough night for the Scotland winger.
Yeah, there's one or two players that I could see maybe Andy Farrell having a preconceived idea about, and he might be one. And then after a bad performance, I just don't see him getting back in the Test reckoning, really. And likewise, Finn Russell, we discussed this before, and you said that you didn't know if Russell might make the plane because you're like, is he an Andy Farrell kind of player? And I can see what you mean, even though I always thought he would just because of his body of work. But Finn Smith puts his best foot forward last night in a tough night for the rest of the team. If Finn Russell does that and have a good start, I could see Andy Farrell very quickly saying, Finn Smith is my guy. Like, at what stage do you think like those sort of decisions will be made?
I think he already has an idea of his Test team in his head. I think he has to. It's a sprint. There's not a lot of games here to get yourself into the team, especially if you are coming from the outside. But I think what Russell has is he got experience. He's been in the arena so many more times than Finn Smith, and I thought Smith was excellent last night. But I wonder. I've seen games where Jack Crowley I thought had a decent game 6, 7 out of 10, and Ireland essentially have blamed them for the way things have gone within a game in terms of losing control of a game, losing control of an attack. So I think the way the coaches view the number 10 position and how they run and control the game, they often put a lot more weight on it than possibly they should in terms of like responsibility.
Would you point to Finn Smith in that regard last night? For me, it was
I wouldn't necessarily. I wouldn't put it past this management team to lay some of at least a part of them on a young out half and the way they lost control. Like I thought it was very interesting. The game almost neatly divides into quarters. The Lions were the better team in the first quarter, didn't get the scored reward for it, and they lost the crowd a bit in the second quarter. The crowd were brilliant for most of the game, but between 20 and 40 minutes, the kind of chattering started. the game drifted. And I think when the game drifts like that, Andy Farrell tends to look at his 10 as one of the reasons why they lose control of it. And it reminded me of some of Ireland's performances, maybe in South Africa last summer and in November, that damaged Jack Crowley. And maybe I'm reading too much into Farrell and what can happen. But like personally, to my eye, Smith had a very good game. But I think when the team loses control in the way that they did, and they did again during the second half, it sometimes comes down to in their eyes on the 10. But at the same time, I think there's other elements of it that will, like, I think Joe Schmidt will be the most interested. He would have been up last night, late in the Australian night, picking it apart, and I think he would have seen a lot that he liked about what the Lions were doing, in particular their backfield work. Like, they're going with Joseph Suaalii in that team. They're going to look at the way the Lions defended the backfield and think we can absolutely make hay here. And we were watching the warm-up game, weren't we? And we were looking at, like, there's a lot of coaches and we don't exactly know what they're all doing. And you got Wigglesworth and Sexton watching a kind of box kicking drill. And all of these things, you just wonder how they're going to take control of this. If they're not assigned responsibility, who's going to be the one who whips that into shape? It's very early stages for these Lions, and it will come over time, I would presume, because there's too many good coaches there. But there was bits of the game that looked quite loose last night, and it's going to be interesting to see who it is who steps up and takes control of it. And there's part of it's getting the right bodies onto the pitch, but there's also an element of organization, of clarity, and all that sort of stuff as well.
They don't seem to want to tell us what their actual roles are, because Richard Wigglesworth was up at the press conference on Thursday and I asked him, and yeah, he didn't really divulge too much. And then Murray Kinsella had a follow-up and tried to ask him as well, and he came out with this bizarre line that it would be up to Andy to tell us. So when you look at it, obviously it's Farrell's attack, and I think we're seeing that in terms of the phase play last night. But you've Andrew Goodman there, who we are assuming is working on the strike moves. You've Johnny Sexton, you've Richard Wigglesworth. So it would be nice to know who has responsibility for what department. But I don't think it's panic stations by any means. I think we would have all had flagged this during the week, that there's a very good chance that last night's game is going to be the toughest game that the Lions will play before the first test on July 19th, isn't it? And I think when the dust settles and Andy Farrell watches his four movies of John Wick or whatever it is, I think he'll actually be quietly happy that he got a run out like that. Because you think back to the last time that Andy Farrell took a team on a 3-test summer tour was with Ireland in 2022. And he obviously added the 2 midweek Maori games to make it as tough as possible. Now, the Lions tour is obviously tough enough on paper in terms of backing up the number of games on tour. But I think when he was sitting down and drawing up potential opponents to play in Dublin before they left, I think Argentina would have been absolutely on top of the list, because he would have known how special it would have been for them and how good they'd be for all the reasons that we've outlined. So I think in that regard, the Lions will welcome the fact that they got a serious test, because like if they had played, was it Japan was the last game that the Lions played? If they had played Japan and they'd put 40, 50 points in Japan, what use would that have been in the long run? So I actually think it was a bit of a curse and a blessing in disguise at the same time that the Lions got such a good run out.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
The headline on the match report on the official Lions website is "No reason to panic for class of 2025," which has a bit of that Iraqi what was his name? I can't remember his name, but that kind of, nothing to see here. Everything is fine.
I go to it's Michael Scott is where I go, just running around the office screaming at everyone to stay calm.
Or the cartoon meme with the burning house and the dog just sitting.
This is fine. Rud, one thing I want to throw at you, because I think you'll be on board with this. I want to circle back to the back row. I'm going to make a prediction. I think that Ryan Baird is going to feature in one of the Lions tests this summer. I think there'll be an injury, and I think he fits the mold in terms of back row balance of what this squad is missing. He's in form, and it's the kind of prediction that if I heard, like, say, an English podcast do it about an English player, I'd probably be rolling my eyes and say, would you give it a rest? But knowing Andy Farrell and knowing he's the coach, he knows the Irish players. Not that he's been Baird's biggest fan, like he's brought him in and dropped them fairly ruthlessly, but Baird showed a maturity in the last couple of weeks of the season that I think if there's an opportunity with an injury, I could see him going out there and almost being required if the kind of back row balance dictates it goes that way.
I like the way you've hardened your line on this across the 4 podcasts that we've recorded since the game last night, because we were like floating the idea of Ryan Baird at like at 10 o'clock last night, and now
I
he's in. He
slept
has
on
the
it.
tour. He has the
I
tour.
slept on it. I woke up and I was like, yes, I
He's
believe it.
like he's definitely the profile, but I don't see it happening based on the way he has kind of been in and out of their toss. I mean, if he hasn't been able to crack Ireland, it's very hard for him from the point he's at now to make it all the way into the test side. But we have seen, like, I think Ryan Jones in 2005, and there's a few different examples of players who've been called up late and arrive in form.
Simon Easterby, there's an example there as well.
Yeah, no, there is examples, and there will be injuries, but he needs a couple of things to go his way. I don't see Andy Farrell, like he was asked in the press conference last night, and because he left himself open, will you bring a couple of extra players? And he kind of left it open again last night. He kind of said, yeah, we'll have a think about that. But I don't see him still a 38-man squad. I don't see Owen Farrell suddenly getting whipped from the Sky Studio and brought over straight away. Maybe someone like Jamie George, if they think they need a fourth hooker, maybe they add a scrum half because Gibson Park's not going to be around for the first week or two. Maybe they need a fullback to cover the Blair Kinghorn. They don't need a back row, but you're right, they haven't got a profile of a player like Baird. Ollie Chesham can do that job and has done it for England. I think the profile of Australia, they kind of go with a double. McWright's such a danger on the deck that they'll want to be very. I think that's why he's gone so heavy on the sevens. Part of that is just the caliber of seven that he has available to him. And I don't think Curry was a disaster at 6 last night. I just he didn't quite nail it, but I don't think he was the issue. I think if you put Jack Conan into that back row, it works a lot better, because I'm like you. I'm not convinced about Earl. I think Baird, like, I've written and talked about Baird a lot over the last couple of years, and his form is excellent. But I think, 3 good games in the URC knockouts is not going to propel you into a Lions squad straight away unless a couple of things go his way. I'm not saying he couldn't do it. I'm not saying he couldn't deliver if he was called up, and I'd love to see it happen. I think what Ryan Baird needs to do is he needs to go to Georgia and dominate in that fixture and take ownership of the Ireland squad as one of the most experienced players on it, and then do the same against Portugal. And if something comes up, he gets that opportunity. But I can see where you're coming from with it. I just don't see it happening unless there is a very specific set of circumstances.
Yeah, like I say, I'm not advocating that he gets called into the squad just tomorrow. I'm just saying that I could see a world where if a back row goes down, he's arguably one of the form back row who's not in the squad at the moment. He brings something very different to the back rows who are there. That's where I'm coming from. It's not like a cause celeb for me that I'm kind of just going a crusade to get him into the squad. I just actually think that the Lions could do it at 6. We were saying a Courtney Laws type 6. The man himself is still around, but Ewan Prody too kind of took him out of the selection reckoning.
Well, I think it's a good wider point that's worth stretching out in terms of the makeup of the back 5 of the pack, because I think the line out was really poor last night. And look, you can definitely give allowances for the fact that, like, Ronan Kelleher, for example, only linked up with the squad this week. The rest of them have only been working together for 2 weeks. So you absolutely give allowances for the teething problems that you saw. But in terms of it being a strong sort of line out back row that played last night, I'm not sure if it is. Now, I think your point about who plays 6, because absolutely you could put Tom Curry at 7. Now, there's pretty good competition there. Josh van der Fleer, like we mentioned, Henry Pollock, who, wow, came on with all. I only picked up on it when I was watching it back last night, but the antics of him when he was coming off the bench was quite something, and then he got handed off by Thomas Albernoz.
Or were the antics just for people who might not have seen it?
He was just kind of whooping and hollering on the bench. I think anyone who was watching it on TV would have picked it up. He was seriously amped up, and like, I have no problem with it. I think Henry Pollock is really good for the game. I think he's seriously,
back it up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but getting handed off by Albernoz was not a great look for a back row, particularly one who had only just come on the pitch. But just to go back to that number 6 slot, like, it could end up being Curry, but I wonder if they would look at, like you said, Rudd and Ollie Chesham there, would they look at Tadhg Byrne, even though I think Tadhg Byrne and Maro Itoje look like a nailed on sort of test second row partnership, but Byrne obviously can play at 6 as well. So they do have options there if they want to have more of that Courtney Laws type figure, or whatever way you want to put it, because I do think the line out suffered last night with that back row.
Yeah,
like I thought even the way that Pollock came on and almost told he came on and told, kind of pointed at the Wales captain and said, "Jog on, mate. I've got this." and it was interesting. Like, he's obviously quite an abrasive figure, and he's quite, he's got quite a new approach, and rugby's quite fusty, and I think Farrell likes a lot of what he offers. He even he kind of made one of those surging runs, like the one he made against Leinster, but unlike Leinster, Argentina chose to tackle him and managed to bring him down. So there were moments where he looked good, but even he's got like, when Northampton are singing and dancing and everything's going well for him, he's a great a player to have in your squad. But if things start going against the Lions, he's going to be a bit of a lightning rod. And I thought it was the one thing that was missed in the Leinster Northampton game was that Caelan Doris ran over Henry Pollock for his try, and he is only 20, and he has still got physical development, and he did get brushed aside by a professional 10 last night. And I'm not sure if you want to be a line starting back row, if you can have that in your game. I think you gotta. So I think Pollock is going to be one of the most interesting parts of the tour, but I think everyone tipping him to be a starting 7, or a lot of people were tipping him to be a starting 7 on the back of that Leinster performance. I think there's still a way to go on that, because the more established players maybe don't have his highlight reel, and they definitely don't have his strut and his attitude, but they probably have more complete games. But he's there, he's part of it, and he has that kind of main character energy. He's going to be, whenever he's involved. I mean, he made it a bit all about him when he was coming on, and then it did go pretty well for him, and that's going to be interesting to watch, because he is a very big star in the eyes of the English media, who already think there's too many Irish players on this squad. So it's going to be very, just a little wrinkle in it all.
Well, I can't remember. Sorry, just to finish on that point, I can't remember who it was, because I think it was a triple sub that he made. And like I said, I didn't pick up with it on the time in the stadium, but he turned around and he was whooping and hollering to whoever was next to him, and whoever it was just seemed to be like, okay, mate, you do you. Like, they weren't giving it back to him at all. So I think he's going to be, like, obviously an infectious sort of energy character, but I don't know if everyone is going to be on the same page as him. But look, you absolutely need characters like that. You wouldn't be writing him off by any means. But Albornoz isn't exactly a big, strong, powerful 10, as brilliant as he played last night. I just thought it was a really bad look for a guy who wants to be starting in that Test series.
Just to wrap up with a scene from the Aviva Stadium press room, Rod, you mentioned the English media maybe not being happy with the amount of Irish players. I was looking forward to a front row seat of the English media, seeing them in action, ravenously going after Andy Farrell. But maybe it was because there was 9 players in the English Test team. I don't think there was a question from the English press pack. Maybe one of the maybe 10 guys that were there. I thought they were going to be going full barrel, but I don't know. I don't know whether they're keeping their powder dry for Australia. But it was a funny press conference. Like, it wasn't. Given the kind of the quotes Andy Farrell gave, you might think, reading them, that like it was a real tete-a-tete, and like Rudd was going after him and Keane was going after him and the English press were going after him. The questions were actually fairly conciliatory, and Andy Farrell was the one bringing the heat, I thought.
I think the reputation is often a little bit overblown in some ways. Look, I think there's boring things like deadlines and stuff. Like an 8 o'clock game on a Friday night is not great for anyone's deadline, and so like, maybe there was a sense that like this is too late for what we need, so we'll leave it to the broadcasters. It was kind of a quite subdued press conference afterwards, and obviously people are also filing on deadline. There's a lot going on, and often we'll say with Ireland we would have a separate bit of access to Andy Farrell, but that wasn't available last night. But I kind of think people are still getting used to the dynamics of a Lions press conference. And one of the things that happens is that TalkSport, the rights holder, get the first 7 or 8 questions, and he kind of set the time so that and Andrew McKenna, their guy, he did offer him a couple of outs, and he didn't take them. He was almost the harshest person that in the room on his own team, but it is early days. It's a disappointing defeat, but I think the overall feeling for most people is that, look, it's not a disaster. And I think we all know that if by the end of July, start of August, when they're going, potentially for a decider in Sydney, this will be long forgotten, and the 2025 Lions will not be defined by what happened in Dublin last night. At the same time, it could be, if things go wrong in Australia and it ends up being a bad tour, this could be seen as the start, the beginning of the end. But as Keane said, if they get it all right and they end up winning a series, they'll look back on playing the world's number 5 team on the eve of their departure as this kind of character building exercise that taught them a lot about themselves, taught them a lot about what it means to be a Lion. They would have, for all of the disappointment, there was still the emotion of running out A lot, there's players who were there in 2021 who didn't play in front of a fan, apart from that Scotland game, the game up in Scotland against Japan, which was still only, it was 15,000. So they got an experience that no Lion has experienced since 2017. Their families were there. The Lions legends in the stand. It was almost like a home game for franchise Lions. I was almost thinking this morning, could the Lions run a team in R360 because they had, play their home games at the Aviva, and I know that's going to be a role. They won't play home games in R360, but like, there was almost this kind of franchise element, and the greats of the game were up in the stands, and it would have meant a lot for those players to play in this game. And they'll be disappointed, but they're up and running now at the same time, and they've got a reference point as they go into their meetings on Monday, and they now know as well that their opponents across this tour are going to play above themselves. So yes, the Western Force are not Australia, but for some of those players, like Curtly Beale played against them in 2013, he's going to get a chance to play against them again. He's got 80 minutes in him, surely. Like, they're going to put it up to them. They're going to get lads, throwing digs that wouldn't normally throw digs. We're going to have things like Duncan McRae. We're going to have different things going on over the next couple of weeks that don't ordinarily happen because it's a Lions tour. And you're going to get smacked in the mouth, both literally and figuratively, and you got to adapt or else it's going to go wrong. So there was a lot of value in last night, but at the same time, they wanted momentum. There was a fireworks show 10 minutes after the game, but the crowd was gone because they lost the game. So they don't have that momentum going, but they do have a lot of information and a lot of valuable lessons, and they'll hope to turn that into a positive as they go.
Just on the occasion, I think it's worth kind of rounding it off with that. I don't think we definitely gave it a lot of love in our first take pod last night, so I feel like we should do the same. Now, as an occasion, look, it's really cynical. It's really easy to be cynical around the corporate juggernaut that is the Lions, and I understand why it rubs people up the wrong way. But I know you were in the same boat, Will. That was my first time being at a Lions game, and I have to admit, it was a brilliant occasion. I think we've been critical of the Aviva atmosphere at different times over the last few years, but that was a genuinely class atmosphere. I was walking into the ground 2.5 hours before the game, and Lansdowne Road was just thronged full of supporters. Pretty much everyone wearing the new Lions jersey or new Lions t-shirt. I know they had a pop-up store on St. Stephen's Green, but they had one in just next to the Lansdowne Clubhouse as well. The sponsors, Howden, had taken over the Lansdowne bar. When I was walking home last night, there was like blacked out taxis outside. It had a real glitz and glamour feel, and I thought it wasn't, I know the ticket prices were insanely expensive, and you were kind of worried that it might be a bit of a corporate crowd, but I thought the crowd were really engaged. I do agree with Rod. Maybe they kind of lost their way when the Lions lost their way, but the Fields of Athenroy was ringing around for two different occasions, particularly at the end game where they were really trying to push the Lions to pull off a late rescue act, which obviously they couldn't. I thought it was brilliant. Like, all the Irish lads got great ovations. Tyg Byrne, Bundy Aki, when they scored their tries. Tyg Furlong, who looked really fit and fresh when he came on, that was good. I'm sure some Leinster fans were wishing that they had seen him in blue more often over the last few weeks. He went off with a HIA laid on, but I think that was from his gum shield. But just as a whole, and as a first sort of taster of what the Lions is, I'm even more jealous of Rudd now heading off to Australia, because if that's a taste of what things are going to be like over there, I think it's going to be a brilliant tour.
Yeah, it was an absolutely phenomenal atmosphere, an absolutely cracking game of rugby. Proving that we've done 4 podcasts on it. It provided a lot of talking points, and it whets the appetite brilliantly for the next couple of weeks. I'd like to thank Rod, who is off to Australia on Tuesday, for joining me. I'd like to thank Keane, who's off to Portugal and Georgia for the Ireland tour, for joining me as well. We'll be chatting to them both across both the Indosport and Left Wing podcasts over the next couple of weeks. So thanks to you for listening as well, and until next time, goodbye.